I'd like to welcome my guests to the program. We have Dr. Sayed Majid Tafri Sheikh Khamenei here in Tehran, legal and political expert, and we also are going to have Mr. Webster Tarpley, author and historian out of Washington. Thank you both for being with us. Well, I'm going to start this off actually with Mr. Tarpley in Washington. Mr. Tarpley, there are growing demands that actually the control of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina not be given into the hands of the Saudi kingdom or the Saudi regime. People are saying that they're incompetent and that anyway the overseeing of these two holy cities should not be in the hands of the Saudi regime, but representatives from various Islamic countries. And once again, the Saudis this year have shown their incompetency. Your take, sir, overall on the Saudi regime and the reaction that we saw, first reaction that we saw yesterday was the Saudi health minister immediately blaming the pilgrims themselves.
I would say, first of all, we should express our condolences to the families of the victims. It's a tremendous tragedy, and as you say, we're not even sure of the actual dimensions of it. When I heard this report, I concluded for myself, for sure, the Saudi royal family must be involved one way or another, and it's either through administrative inadequacies, the lack of preparation, the lack of planning, the lack of emergency services, as you say, or actually the idea that it was a convoy, a motorcade of dozens of cars, I guess, with about 200 soldiers and 150 police officers to guard the prince, right, the son of the new king, right, the son of King Salman, of the Saud family. He was driving around the place, and he had this huge convoy with him, and that seems to have, or quite possibly gave it a push in a certain direction. So the Saudi royal family, these are people who are incompetent from the word go. This is it's a group of several thousand princes, right? 2,000 or 3,000, I guess, is the usual estimate in the Saudi royal family. And naturally, they don't do any work. They have advisors and other people who do this all for them. So they do not get involved in the nitty-gritty of actually planning for things like this. And of course, we had more recently, a week ago, the collapse of a crane. I believe the crane was actually owned by the Saudi bin Laden construction company, and this collapsed near the Grand Mosque and killed about 100 people. But the other thing we could say is if we look at a summary of how the Hajj, the yearly pilgrimage, has been conducted, say, over the last 25 years, if you go back to 1990, you have a similar incident, a stampede inside a pedestrian tunnel with 1,426 victims was the official figure. And you see every couple of years there are at least a few hundred victims for some incident or another, right? Okay. So I think it's clear that somebody else ought to be running it, right? There are proposals that it could be an international organization. It might be the Organization of the Islamic Conference. This remains to be seen. Naturally, this has to be left to the interested countries. But you'd say certainly that the Saudis have proved that they are simply incompetent, that they are incapable of organizing something on this scale. And in order to avoid hundreds of victims next year, something really ought to be done. All
right. Thank you so much. Stay with me, Mr. Tarpley. Turning to Dr. Tafri Sheikh Khamenei. Thank you so much for being with us. When we look at this situation, I mean, we hear about it too often, tragedies that are taking place in Saudi Arabia. And yet the Saudis do not even want to hear the possibility of actually giving up that, if you want to call it, power or control over the custodianship of Mecca and Medina. Looking at this situation that has happened again this year, What do you think would be the best scenario in order for this not to repeat itself, one, and what do you think should happen as far as who is responsible for what has happened yesterday?
Yes, let me join two other guests of your program to convey my sincere condolences to all victims' families in all over the world, not just Iranian, but all brothers and sisters in Islam, rather than Shia or Sunni, who lost their families in the Mecca. And let me inform distinguished viewers that there is no difference between Shia or Sunni. All our families are like them, and we are so unhappy about what happened as a very bad tragedy. For the second time in last week, look what happened for the crane last week, and it's the second story, and who knows what will be the third one. I think at this stage, United Nations, especially Mr. Ban Ki-moon, should dispatch a fact-finding group to Mecca to see what happened really in this part of the world. They should accept their responsibility. The people didn't come there for killing each other. Accusing Africans for the main cause of this tragedy is completely disgusting. The Saudis should say, what are they doing? This religious behavior is now happening each year for 1,437 times up to now. Everybody knows what's going to happen in this month, in these 2-3 days. Managing 2-3 million population in the same day is a very easy job in the era of information and technology. This is a shame for human beings, and especially Muslims. Look at the viewpoint of a European, for example, looking at what's happening for the Muslims. Why we shouldn't be able to manage such an easy job? I think at this stage is responsibility for all international community, and mainly Muslims and the OIC members, to put into consideration very seriously this disaster and think how they can manage. Unfortunately, Saudis at the same time killing the people in Yemen, at the same time are trying to save the other Muslims in Mecca. This contradiction definitely reducing the level of managing in the royal family. And I'm so unhappy, and once again, I convey my deepest condolences to all victims.
Well, speaking of contradictions that you have talked about, Mr. Tafrishi, other contradictions, Mr. Tarpley, if we look at the situation, Mecca itself, or if we look at the Hajj ceremony itself, is one of bringing Muslims from all over the world dress alike, so there is no difference between those who are rich or poor, basically putting everyone on the same level, and then it's up to that individual and their relationship to one's creator. But isn't it contradictory in itself if we look at the scenario that it is being held now? Of course, it's Saudi Arabia. Of course, this was the Hajj, and it has been taken over by the Saudi regime and named Saudi Arabia. But in general, when we talk about not showing differences between, and we see even with that convoy, whether it happened right at the time of the Stampede or prior to it or afterwards, the point is that there is definitely a difference. Money does make a difference in Saudi Arabia. And there is a difference at how the Saudis treat each other, treat the pilgrims that are going there. And as we can see, everyone else is walking, and this convoy then is rushing through. Do you see, tell me about your perspective as far as the contradictions in general in dealing with the Saudi regime.
I think we can say, first of all, the way the Saud family got this position of being the guardian and administrator of the holy places is thanks to the British. This comes out of World War I. It comes out of the Treaty of Sèvres and then some events in the 1920s. So there's nothing, as far as I can see from the outside, there's nothing divinely ordained about the Saud family that they should have this right. In other words, that's not part of the religion. That's just a political result, which therefore could be changed. It's a temporal result. Again, the difference that strikes me is between the 3,000 members of this unspeakable royal family and everybody else. This is an absolute monarchy. Excuse me. It's something that has not existed anywhere else well, say in Europe, it hasn't existed for, what, 300 years approximately. And you could even argue that something like that never existed in Europe, unless you want to go back to the Dark Ages. So with this, we're back in the Dark Ages. I'm also wondering about accountability. For example, has anybody resigned as a result of this? We see if Volkswagen fakes the results of their exhaust pipe tests, then the president of Volkswagen has to quit. It's like ministerial responsibility. I'm wondering, who is the Saudi minister who is responsible for this entire thing, and has that person resigned, and has his superior resigned? And it would take quite a few resignations to make up for it. And again, it happens periodically, right? A year ago, 719 pilgrims during a stampede. 2006, 350 pilgrims approximately killed. 2004, 251 pilgrims. And it's a constant refrain. So what has been done? How does the Saudi government respond to these things? Of course, there is no freedom of speech. There is no public life in the usual sense. There's no parliament. There's no commission that we seem to hear about. So what goes on when something like this occurs? And this is, again, the idea that we have an absolute monarchy of the Saudi type. Here we are in the 21st century, and we're dealing with something that in Europe would take you back to the Dark Ages. How is that possible? And of course, I must say sadly that it's the support of the United States that makes this all possible. The support of the British to set it up, and then the support of the United States to keep it going. So this is also a shame on the United States, a country founded on anti-monarchism that has now become the main guardian of the worst monarchy in the world.
And Dr. Tarpley, if we look at what Mr. Tarpley talked about, is that as far as he can see, this regime is not ordained divinely, which of course we know is the case. But do you think that at times there's some confusion among some of the Muslims because the Saudis present themselves as the guardian of the two holy mosques, that a lot of times that accountability is not demanded as much as it would be if this happened somewhere else? And that at the end of the day, they will say it was just meant to be, it was ordained by God, that this was the time that these people would die, and that's the way it is. There's nothing that can be done. How do you see it?
The responsibility should be, added to the conclusion of a job. Look, if they are responsible, if they call themselves at the Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, everybody, not just Iranians, all countries, Muslim countries who are going to enjoy of this, holy pilgrims, should be happy. But you see what happened yesterday. It's very unique in the international community. Then how we can name them as the Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, or the servants for the Mecca and Medina, but at the same time, we be witness of the mismanagement, not a small one, but the biggest size. 2,000 people killed. Without any doubt, it is responsibility should be concluded at the end of this tragedy. As your guest said, the King Royal should answer to international community what they are doing. This is the same practice that's happening at the same day every year. They have lots of money. They are charging people for the visa. They are issuing visa. When they are issuing visa, all the countries, not just the royal family, but even we have many international gatherings in New York, in Geneva, in Vienna, they must accept the safest possible way the life of those who receive this, visas. But you see, they are accusing easily the Africans at the main cause. How is possible? The people didn't came to this part of the world to kill each other. They came here to be Haji and come back to the country and enjoy the hospitality of their families in their own family, in their own country. But they are now should reserve a grave in the cemetery. Then this is very bad tragedy that I think Ban Ki-moon and other international community, especially the Western society, who are always claiming that we are defending of human being. They are human. They killed innocently, and they must be somehow respected. Their life should be respected, and now the responsible of this tragedy should put into trial and answer why happening for the many times, and each time much more worse than the before, and why we need to tolerate such a domination of this kingdom royal on this two holy, very big shrines. I mean, Mecca and Medina. These are belong to human being, belongs to Muslims, Shia, Sunnis, not to a royal family.
Well, Mr. Tarpley, if we look at what the Saudi Health Minister Khalid Al-Fali, what he said immediately following the death of the pilgrims, he said that the pilgrims, quote, had been undisciplined and not followed movement instructions. Do you see that as sort of being arrogant and perhaps condescending at a time when perhaps the best statement would be that we have to investigate to see the exact cause, but immediately the Saudi regime started blaming the people for this?
Well, it is, of course, outrageous. The first thing out of the mouth of such an official should be, I hereby resign, because I have to take some responsibility for this horrendous outcome. And then to compound that by blaming the victim makes it even more really unbelievable. And as your other guest pointed out, this is not just to resign, right, the political consequences, but this is criminal behavior. In other words, criminal negligence. Some of these people really ought to be put on trial. And then there's the issue of liability. You know, those victims deserve some kind of compensation. They can't be brought back, but there ought to be some process by which they can assert the criminal liability of the Saudi regime and the incompetence of its subcontractors and so forth. And again, I've only mentioned stampedes so far, right? There are stampedes quite regularly because of the nature of the event, right? All of that could be administered, right? You could set up systems to prevent it, but then there have been fires, right? For a long time, the Saudi royal family allowed tents to be put up that were not fireproof. They could burn down, and in 1997, they did burn down, and that was another 350 deaths. And we've had deaths from fires in buses as recently as 2011, and then there have been other events, right? There's sometimes political extremists get involved, and then for a long time, for about 20 years, from the 70s to the early 90s, the Saudis were unable to organize the air traffic control to handle this huge number of airplanes coming in. So you had those crashes, right, coming out of Abdulaziz International Airport in some cases. So this is an entire event. I guess it's one of the biggest gatherings that takes place yearly anywhere in the world, and it's obvious that there's no infrastructure for it. There's no method to make sure that this can be done safely and peacefully and in the religious spirit that it ought to have.
Okay. Well, Mr. Tarpley, you said something interesting, no infrastructure. And Mr. Tafrishi, Dr. Tafrishi, I want to look at that, no infrastructure. We know that the Saudi regime is a very, very rich regime on its own. And besides that, for the Hajj, people pay lots of money, many saving on their lives to actually make this journey. We look at that and we compare to perhaps a lack of total organized infrastructure right now in Iraq, where we have, of course, Daesh being very, very active. And despite that, if we look at the ceremony, which is Arba'in, the 40th day ceremony after the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, where the numbers are between 15 million to 20 million people. At Hajj this year, it was 2 million people. And yet this does not happen in a place like Iraq. What's the difference in your perspective? What's going on here?
Exactly. As I said, this is not a big job. In the era of information and technology, handling millions of people at the same time is possible. Look at the many occasion in the world. I don't know, soccer World Cups, or I know millions of population at the same time handling in some part of the world is an easy job. Of course, it's a complex, but at the same time, because we have technology, because we have information, because we have mobile systems, lots of other technologies, then it's possible. As you mentioned, 15 million at the same time in Karbala or Najaf, except some, unfortunately, suicide bombers that are from extremists, nothing happening, nothing at all. Why Royal Kingdom of Saudis shouldn't be able to manage? There is some contradiction inside this family. I think there is some dirty hands that cost life of the thousands of the innocent people. Then what we need for revealing the secrets of this royal family, that what's happening inside, that they don't pay attention to the life of others, especially in the very important moment of the time of the year, I mean in the Eid al-Qurban or Eid al-Adha, that why such a bad and barbaric stories happening for Muslims. How we can now, in front of the eyes of the, I don't know, Western countries say, okay, we are democratized, or I don't know, high-level Muslim countries. They will laugh. They will say you cannot handle 2-3 million at the same time. But it's not our fault. It is the fault of kingdom that they don't pay attention to the other countries' advices. They don't even accept Iranian and other countries' help after disaster. This is very bad. ICRC of Iran wanted to help, but they rejected. This is again other responsibility.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Tafrishi, but we're out of time. I appreciate you being with us, Dr. Sayed Majid Tafrishi Khamenei, legal and political expert out of Tehran, and out of Washington, author and historian Dr. Webster Tarpley. And viewers, thank you so much for being with us. Don't go away. I'll be back with the news in detail in less than 3 minutes. Stay tuned, please.